we'll start.
That's good.
All right, well, welcome. Thanks for attending and taking time out of your day. It's a 2-hour kind of training. The first hour is going over how to create accessible documents from the start. And the second hour is a little more free form of retrofitting documents you no longer have a source document for, and you just have some PDF you need to make better. There's many reasons for making PDFs and all documents more accessible. I'm sure Terry will go into it. So this is brought to you by the Accessibility Task Force and Web Communication Technologies. We're happy to have Terry Thompson here through this. He's a UW Accessibility Specialist at the UW, as well as here. There's a cool arrangement we have, so he helps us out whenever he can. And I'll let him take from here. It's going to be recorded, so that's why it has speakers happening. So, and if you can't see them, there's plenty of computers, so feel free to come in. If you're not here for this class, you're welcome to stay in here. Just be quiet. And so, thanks.
No worries, David. Okay. You're not hearing me through the mic, but hopefully Camtasia is hearing me through the mic.
You've turned down the speaker. I want them to hear you.
Okay. True. Test, test, test. Check, 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 check.
Why don't you speak right
Check.
into it?
Check. Ah, there we go. Okay. Yeah, like Max said, thanks everybody for. And as he said, I technically am a UW employee, but I live in Bellingham, and so I worked out this arrangement many years ago to have an office here at Western. Keeps me off of I-5, keeps me out of traffic. I still have to go down to Seattle, a couple times a week. But for the most part, I do have an office here, and in exchange for that arrangement, I provide accessibility assistance to web tech and really to anybody at Western who has questions about technology accessibility, web accessibility, it's kind of my specialty, and document accessibility. So we have a huge problem at UW, and I think you do here at Western as well, that there are hundreds, thousands of documents that are being distributed, and we generally don't give a whole lot of thought to, can everybody read this? There's sort of an assumption that I can read this, so anybody else that I give this document to can read it. So that isn't always the case. There are lots of different issues with how you prepare a document that affects whether people can read it, depending on what sort of tools they're using. So that's what we're going to explore today, particularly focusing on PDF and working with Word as well as one of the primary authoring tools that can be used to create a PDF. So I didn't really expect there to be quite so many people. Usually when I give a talk about accessibility, there are 5 or 6 people show up. And so this is a wonderful turnout. I'm really glad to see that everybody's here. But that also complicates things a little bit because the second hour was going to be, you guys are all doing your own thing and I'm roaming around looking over your shoulder and helping. And there's some practicality limitations there. We'll still do some of that, but I think it's going to be a little bit more formal as we go into the second hour, just looking at some PDFs together, and there'll be some hands-on where you can practice some of the things we're talking about. We'll also be synchronized. But then we'll probably have a little bit of time at the end to have some open lab time so you can work on your own documents, and it'll just be real informal. So Max introduced me as Terry, and I do go by Terry. Terrill is for search engine optimization purposes. There are hardly any Terrill Thompsons, and there are some very unsavory Terry Thompsons. So if you want to find me on Google, Terrill is the way to go. If you want to find the unsavory Terrys, you could do that too, but it's not me. This is a sample document. It's, as you can see, an introduction to physics course syllabus. It's got everything you need to know about your physics course. So I'll give you a chance to look over the syllabus, and then I'm going to ask you a couple questions about it. It's pretty short, so it shouldn't take a whole lot of time. Let's start with course objectives. How many course objectives are there in this course? One course objective. Anybody disagree? 3 course objectives. Okay, there's some confusion. Why is there confusion? That would seem to be a pretty simple thing, wouldn't it? How about what percent of your grade is project 2? What is the reading assignment during week 2? These are pretty tough questions, aren't they? The reason they're tough, and you've got everything you need to know right here. It's all there, and it's just text. So if I'm blind, I'm using a screen reader, I've got access to all that. It's just text. But what's missing? Why are these questions so hard? Yeah, it's just text, but there's no structure. So this is the same document with structure. So we have all the same text, but now we can make a lot more sense of it visually, right? For example, what's the main heading or the title of this course? Okay? Introduction to Physics course syllabus is the main heading of the document. What about, what are the secondary headings in this document? Okay. Textbook, course objectives, class schedule, grades. How do you know that the answer to that first question was Introduction to Physics course syllabus? What is it about that that says this is the main heading of this document? Okay, it's larger, centered, bold. These are all visual cues though, right? So if somebody is a non-visual user, they're blind, they're listening to the document with a screen reader, or they're using a Braille device to get a row of dots that refreshes as they read the document. They don't see big, bold, centered text. So therein lies the problem. We need to make sure that our headings are not just big, bold, centered text. That's just text that's pretending to be a heading, but it's not really a heading, unless we specifically mark it up as a heading. For a main heading, that would be a heading level 1. The subheadings would be a heading level 2. How many of you know a little bit about HTML or web design? About half the hands go up. So this is an idea that is really sort of a core idea within web design and web development, that you've got a markup language, HTML, and you tag text so that it has all these sorts of characteristics, so that you know what this text is. You know that it's a heading level 1, a main heading, or you know it's a subheading, a heading level 2. The list items, you know that those are list items visually because they have a bullet in front of them. But in order to make sure that a screen reader user understands that this is a list of 3 course objectives, then you have to code that as a list. And one of those items in the list is a list item. If we go down to the table, how do you know, there are 2 tables on the page, right? How do you know those are tables? You've got lines that kind of organize them into columns and rows. And you've got column headers, which are bolder than everything else. In the second table, you actually have 2 rows of column headers with some headers nested inside of others. But that positioning and the bolding makes that visually apparent. But again, we're dependent on what's going on behind the scenes here on a web page. There has to be coding that says this is a table, this is a row, this is a header inside of that, and this is the scope of that header. All of that kind of information is part of the HTML language. And so web pages really give you great flexibility when it comes to providing this kind of structure, communicating this structure so that anybody can understand it and can read it back to the user in a way that makes sense. There's also a sentence down at the bottom that, I don't know how easy that is to see, but it's not in English. So if you were going to try to pronounce that, anybody want to make a stab at it? Surely there's somebody that speaks French in the room. You probably wouldn't pronounce that using English rules, right? And if all we know is English and we don't know that French is pronounced differently, we might try, to read that like si programmi est également, but that's not going to be right. And, the person that understands French is going to scratch their head and say, what? Whatever French say for what? Okay? So screen readers actually are multilingual, some of them. And so they can read English and they can read French and they can switch back and forth and they can read French correctly. But so far they're not smart enough to understand that that's French. So they have to be told, this is a French sentence. And then they understand, okay, this is French. And so then they pronounce it correctly. They switch into French mode, read that. And so that then, it's another thing that we have to be aware of as we're producing documents, that we have to code our content so that the language is identified. So the entire document is identified as English, and that one piece that's in another language is identified as being in French. So again, this is all possible within HTML, but we want to explore how to do the same thing in different formats. Before we go on, though, I want to do just a quick demonstration of a screen reader so you can kind of get a sense for what this is all about and how it works. So I'm going to remove my mic and let JAWS do the talking. JAWS is one of several screen readers. It's the most popular screen reader in the Windows environment. You might be familiar with VoiceOver. That's on the Mac side. It's built into both Mac OS and iOS. So you've got a screen reader that you can play with if you have any Apple devices.
Introduction to Physics. Accessible University Introduction to Physics course syllabus textbook. Our sole text for this course will be Introduction to Physics, 2nd edition, authored by the instructor.
Typically when a screen reader user opens up a document for the first time, they're going to rely on that heading structure. So if they want to jump from heading to heading to heading, they can do that just by hitting the letter H. And that then allows them to jump very easily within a document. But it also gives them a sense for how this document is organized, what its structure is, what its outline is. So that's why it's important to really think about that outline when you're identifying the headings on a page. So, so there is an H1 or main heading, and then there are H2s, which are that second level within the outline. And a longer document with a lot of depth, then you might have some H3s, maybe some H4s. But preserve that outline as you're using headings. So let me go back to the top.
Introduction to Physics course syllabus.
And so I've just opened the document. I'll hit the H key to jump to the first heading.
Introduction to Physics course syllabus heading level 1.
It tells me what the heading level is. I'll hit H again.
Textbook heading level 2. Course objectives heading level 2. Class schedule heading level 2. Grades heading level 2. Wrapping to top. Introduction to Physics course syllabus heading level 1.
Okay, so I've been through the entire document now, and I hear wrapping to top, so I know that I've reached the end. I'm back at the beginning again, and now I have a better understanding of what the outline of this document is. So from all of that, what I really want are those course objectives. So I know where that is now, approximately, within the outline. So I just hit H a couple times.
Textbook heading level 2. Course objectives heading level 2.
Okay, so there's my course objectives. Now I can just hit my arrow key to go down into that section to see what the course objectives are.
List of 3 items. Bullet to offer students exposure to basic principles of physics.
Okay, so the first thing I heard was that this is a list with 3 items. So that's because it actually is coded as a list. If it wasn't coded as a list, it wouldn't be able to tell me how many items are in it. And that actually is pretty significant information. You know, if this was a list of 30 items, I might not want to read it right now. Maybe I don't have time to go through 30 course objectives, but I can read 3 really quickly and then move on to whatever I intend to do next. So, and screen readers also have the functionality to track sort of where you are within the list. So if I'm on, even if it's a longer list, if I'm on item 15 of 20, that's significant information. So I want to be able to know that. Coding this as a list is important then. Let me jump down to one of the tables.
Jump to line dialog. Escape. Grid wrapping to top. Introduction to textbook course object class schedule heading level 2. Blank. Table with 3 columns and 8 rows.
So it gives me the structure of the table. And as I navigate through that table, because the top row is coded as table headers, column headers, then I can keep track of where I am. Moving from row to row, it will remind me of what the column headers are. Imagine a really complex table. It can be really difficult to sort of track where you are when you're listening to it one cell at a time. It's important information to make sure those headers are identified as headers. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit.
In chapters 2-3.
I want to see where I am then.
Chapters 2-3. Alt Control Windows left a row. Control Windows left a row. Kinematics selected. Alt Control Windows right a row.
It's not doing what I expected it to. Which happens sometimes during a demo. But anyway, the idea is that JAWS should be able to move through the table, and no matter where I am, I can keep track of what the headers are, what the row headers are, if there are any, what the column headers are. So I always know where I am within that table. So I'm going to jump down to the end of that French sentence, and it is coded as, it has in HTML, it's lang equals FR, so it's identifying it as French. So the language of that paragraph is French, and therefore JAWS should be able to switch into French mode and pronounce that correctly.
Disponible en français sur demande.
That's pretty good French? You French speakers? Yeah, it's a lot better than it would have been if we hadn't identified that as French. Okay, so this is a fully accessible web page. It's in HTML, and screen reader obviously is able to interact with that and make perfect sense of it, and everything is pretty clear and easy to understand. We also have that there's an image at the top, which I didn't point out, but because it has alternate text, there actually is some descriptive text behind the scenes that describes that image, then the screen reader will read that too, so that's a way of making images accessible. So our goal as we produce documents, any kind of document, not just web pages, but I mean most of the documents we're creating are probably in Word or in PDF or maybe some other format, but most document formats have all of this or most of this same capability. HTML is really kind of it sets the bar. It does a really good job on accessibility if web developers use those features. But Word also supports a lot of this. PDF supports most of this. So the question is, as we're creating documents, how do we make sure that we have all this kind of structural information so that headings are headings, lists are lists, images have alt text, and so forth? Any questions so far? Okay. So what are the characteristics of an accessible document? Well, it really is kind of simple at its heart. First of all, it needs headings. That really is arguably maybe the most important thing because it gives the overall structure of a document and it allows users who can't see the document to navigate through the document and very quickly and very efficiently. Particularly important in a longer document. And I'll point out that search engines have the same issues that non-visual users have, because they can't see. They're processing the content of web pages depending on that same structural markup. And so when you've got headings, subheadings, and so forth, Google is going to do a lot better job of indexing your site, which is going to be ultimately in your favor. Same sort of thing, make sure that lists really are coded as lists. Make sure that if you are communicating information with alt text or with images, that you provide a short description of what that message is that you're trying to communicate. Make sure that the page is read in a logical reading order. So visually, we usually read from top to bottom and from left to right if we got multiple columns. So you want to be sensitive to that, particularly in PDF, that when we create PDFs, sometimes the read order, somebody that can't see the document, is not at all what we would expect. Be sure that we're able to check that and tweak it if it needs to be tweaked. And there might be a few other things too, depending on the doc. Just other features that you introduce. If anything you introduces new accessibility concerns, and so you just have to sort of be thinking about that. This content that I've just added a table, or I've just added a form, or some other sort of content, then what is the impact of that on accessibility? And then you need to explore accessibility a little bit further, just related to that one issue. So I've kind of come up with a rundown of what I see as the most accessible document formats in approximate order, and with a caveat that some users will disagree, including users of assistive technologies or other users with disabilities. Just largely, from my experience, it seems to be based on familiarity and comfort, that they sometimes will pick even just a plain text file as their preferred format, even though a plain text file really has no structure. So it's kind of like that first slide that we saw, just a bunch of text. But it's something that some people are comfortable with. Not many anymore, but there are a few people that are more comfortable with that than with trying to navigate the user interface in a more complex piece of software. But if we just look at all the features of a document, most accessible formats are, anybody want to hazard a guess on the first? I've already sort of given this one away. What's the most accessible document format? HTML. Web pages are the most, since HTML4, have had the best possible markup for accessibility. HTML5 raises the bar. There's even better accessibility now than there ever was before. Number 2, any guesses? I would lump Markdown as HTML because that's what ultimately is delivered. Yeah, but it's a great way to write HTML. Yes, I heard somebody say Word. Other guesses? This is one we don't think of very often, but EPUB, EPUB 3 specifically, designed for books, digital books, has really good structural markup, and readers that support that for people with disabilities do a good job of supporting it, and so that also is really good if you're distributing books. Number 3. It's actually not Word, but PDF. PDF actually has really good underlying structure, and that's going to be a large part of what we talk about today, is that it can do almost everything that HTML can do. There are some exceptions, but it actually is really good at supporting structure. The problem is it's not easy to get there. There's a lot of work that we have to do as authors, or somebody in the chain between author and consumer has to do some work to make sure that the accessibility features of PDF are fully utilized. So that's what we're going to explore. So I would put Word 4th. Word has decent structure, but there are some things that it can't do that PDF and HTML can do. And the things that it can do really aren't things that it can do so much as things that assistive technologies have figured out sort of how to hack their way in so that they can get accessibility out of a Word doc, even if Word wasn't really designed with accessibility in mind. So it's possible to create a pretty accessible Word doc. And there actually are lots of users, going down to my caveat, lots of users who would say, I prefer Word over PDF just because it's, I'm more comfortable with it. PowerPoint also is pretty accessible as long as you use the templates that Microsoft provides, and if you have lots of images, like I've got some icons here, and images throughout my presentation, those have got to have descriptions on them, and PowerPoint provides a mechanism for describing images in the same fashion that Word does. And finally, just email or plain text, not very accessible because it doesn't have that structure that we need to communicate what this text actually is other than just words. So, talk about PDF. Actually, before we do that, though, any questions about? Obviously, lots of other formats, too. Chances are, if they're not in the list, then they might have some accessibility problems or challenges. Okay, so Adobe PDF, there actually are lots of different flavors of PDF depending on what tool you're using to create your PDF. They all have very different sort of output. But in general, there are three types. First is just an image where you scan a document, you save it as a PDF, then that really is just an image. There's actually nothing there for a non-visual person to latch onto. So that text within that image needs to be converted. So there has to be optical character recognition. You have to actually have a computer read that, translate the visual text into actual text that then is readable to assistive technologies. So that's the least accessible type, not accessible at all. The second type, and the most common type, is a document. So you actually do have text, but there's no underlying structure. So that's like that first slide that we saw. Just a bunch of text, and when you've got a long document, it really becomes unreadable and completely inaccessible. Even though the text is technically inaccessible, with no structure, not much that you can really do with that. Finally, the third type, and the type that is our goal, is a tagged PDF, which has an underlying tag structure that is very much like HTML. So headings are tagged as headings, paragraphs are tagged as paragraphs, images have alt text, and so forth. This has been around since Acrobat 5, which was in the early 2000s, yet we still haven't caught up to producing tagged PDF. Not a lot of tools produce tagged PDF by default, and some don't produce it at all. And so we have to be conscious of what tools we're using and make sure that we're using them correctly. But ultimately, this is what we want. We want a tagged PDF, and we want those tags to be the correct tags. Just like if we're creating a web page, we want the HTML to be correct. So how do we get there? How do we create a tagged, well-structured PDF, if that's the goal? Well, we want to use a tool that supports it. So I've listed all those that I know do, and there was some discussion back in 2011 on a W3C discussion list that I'm on, and so people were kind of speculating about other tools too, but there was no consensus as to other tools other than these. Microsoft Office actually produces tagged PDF by default if you save as PDF, and so we're going to walk through that process. So that's a good thing. And you can also get good tagged PDFs out of OpenOffice and LibreOffice. WordPerfect, I actually didn't realize was still around. Anybody use WordPerfect lately? Anybody use it regularly? No hands go up. Anybody know that it still existed? I was actually surprised. I was a WordPerfect 5.1 user back in the day. You can still in WordPerfect save as WordPerfect 5.1 as well as all the versions of WordStar. Anybody remember WordStar? This was kind of testing WordPerfect was a walk through memory lane. I really loved it. And I wanted it to be fully accessible because I was, I'm so thrilled to be using it. And it does an okay job, but it's not really as good as Office in creating a good tag PDF that has all the stuff. Lotus Symphony, InDesign. Anybody using InDesign to create documents? Okay, I get about 5 or 6 hands up. It does produce tag PDF, but it requires a particular workflow, and there are lots of different ways to use InDesign to get output. I'm not an InDesign expert myself, but there are resources. Probably the best resources are on the Adobe website. That they have videos and white papers on how to create an accessible PDF working with InDesign. And so that's my recommendation is kind of to walk through some of those materials and be familiar with what that workflow is. So we're using one of those tools that supports tag PDF. And we follow a few basic rules. First of all, we use heading styles. Second, we use other built-in structural features, such as lists and tables. If the authoring tool has a list icon on the button bar or a table icon on the button bar, that's how we want to create our lists or our tables. I've seen this on more documents than I would think, but people sometimes don't like the way lists, don't like the little black bullet or any of the available bullets like within Word. And so they want a different looking list. And so they'll just use plain text and then place an image in front of each item, each paragraph. That's just paragraphs with images. It's not really a list. And so it's important to work within the capabilities of your authoring tool. Word actually has the ability to customize that little icon, so you can add your own icons, but you still can code it as a list. So that's important. Yes, Max.
So if you're typing,
you convert it into a list. Just words magic.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it does convert it into an actual list when you do that. Yeah. Want to add alternate text to images? We're going to walk through all of these, so it'll become apparent what we're talking about. Plus, we'll encounter kind of some tricky points that we need to think through and work through. We want to define the language, especially if the document contains foreign language content. Anybody here have documents where there's multiple languages within the document? There are a few cases where that is an issue. I actually worked with a student who was taking, she's a blind student taking an Introduction to Spanish course. And they had a lot of, this was web content primarily, but a lot of content online that was multilingual. So you'd have you call it an English document, but 50% of it was in Spanish. So, and her screen reader was just reading everything as English. So she's not learning to pronounce Spanish content correctly as she's reading this document. So that was an issue where the department actually had students go in and just everywhere there was Spanish text, just tagged that as Spanish. And they went through, and just within a couple of days, they had the entire course tagged so that it was accessible to her. But they hadn't thought about that before. And so, but that is an issue. So finally, once you've done all this work to the original source document, you've got a good accessible source document, Word document, let's say. Final step then is making sure that all that work is preserved when you save as PDF. And there are ways to save as PDF, preserve your accessibility markup, and there are ways that don't. So we want to make sure that we're doing it the right way so that we have all that accessibility in the final product, in the PDF. If you created a PDF and you didn't follow those steps, or you acquired a PDF from some other source and you don't have the original source document, then that's okay. You can actually add accessibility after the fact. You can go in and fix an inaccessible document using Adobe Acrobat Pro. And so there's a particular workflow you can step through in order to do that. And we're gonna walk through that today as well. So this is my final slide before we jump into the how-to. It lists a few resources. One of these is the WebTech website. So if you go to www.edu/webtech/webstandards, you'll find a menu of lots of things related to web standards, including accessibility pages. And there's a section at the bottom of this particular page, the accessibility how-to page. There are a couple of sections related specifically to PDF accessibility or document accessibility. And they link to this second resource, which is one we developed at the UW, which is the PDF accessibility workflow that we're going to step through today. So it's just 6 simple steps. All of these steps, answer some questions, and then depending on your answer, follow some recommended steps in order to get an accessible PDF out of a document that isn't accessible by default. So finally, we have some sample documents that hopefully I think you can download onto your some folder where you can access them on these computers or onto the desktop. And it's a zip file, so then you can unzip it, and we'll have some files that we can work with together and kind of step through this process. So the next step is to open up a web browser and go to terrillthompson.com/downloads/syllabus.zip. And if that works, then you should be prompted to save the zip file. So you save it someplace that you have access to. And then you should be able to open it up and extract the files that are inside it into a syllabus folder. So if you have any questions or something doesn't go right, raise your hand. If you see the twin sisters, something didn't go right. You got your N and your W switched around. There you go. Everybody okay? All right, so you should have something like what I have here on the screen. A folder called syllabus. Inside that folder, a bunch of files, most of which are called syllabus, some variation thereof. And let's start with the syllabus not accessible doc, the Word doc. So if you just double click on that, then that should open up in Word. And it may prompt you at the beginning to enable editing. And since we do want to edit this, then click Enable Editing. Again, just raise your hand if you have any difficulty with that. So the title probably gives us away, syllabus not accessible, but I'll ask anyway. Is this accessible? Let's start with headings. If we just click anywhere on that top heading, the main heading, Introduction to Physics Course Syllabus, then if this was coded as a heading 1, it would be the heading 1 style up in the ribbon selected. Okay, so this is how we make headings in Word, as we use the built-in styles within Word. So Word has heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, and so forth styles, and that actually is the information that screen readers use in order to identify heading structure in a document. So heading 1 actually is not highlighted. This is just normal text. So this is text that is big, bold, centered, pretending to be a heading, but not really a heading. So what we want to do is select that text, and we want to make it a heading. So we've got all these choices at the top for different heading levels. This is the main heading, so we want it to be a heading 1. Now, it might be tempting to say, wait a minute, heading 1 is kind of a thin font, and I don't really like the look of that. I like heading 2 better. But we don't want to make our decision about heading level based on appearance. Okay, that's a really important concept, that it has to be based on the outline. So this is a heading 1, and so it has to be a heading 1. That has to be what we choose. But we have control over what that heading 1 looks like. It doesn't have to look like what it looks like by default. So with the main heading selected, you can go up to the heading 1 button in the ribbon and right-click it, and then select Update Heading 1 to match selection. So now the heading 1 style looks like what our text that we had selected looks like. So we've changed the look of heading 1, and we have also made this a heading 1. This text is now marked up as heading 1. So we've improved the accessibility dramatically just by doing this little thing. We now have a heading in this document that's going to really help screen reader users to understand the document better.
Is that what shows you?
There's, on the ribbon, there's actually a little blue border around the heading that's selected. See that?
No, I'm looking. Oh,
Yeah, just if you just drag across. There you go, yeah. You actually don't even need to select all of it. You can just be positioned somewhere within it, and I think, anyway, it'll understand you want all of that to be changed. So let's do the same thing with our heading 2s. There are 4 of them. Select each one of those. The heading 2 style actually looks pretty similar, so we can probably preserve that. But we need to select each heading 2 and then click on heading 2 in order to make sure that those are 2s. So not only does this help accessibility, but it also helps you as an author, because what if you've got a long document, 90 pages, you've been working forever on this, and you've got a lot of heading 2s, heading 3s throughout the document, and you decide you want to change the look of those heading 2s throughout the document. It would take you forever to go through and do every heading 2. Now that those are actually heading 2 styles, you can go in just within the button. You can right-click on that heading 2 button and modify it. And let's say maybe we want all those heading 2s to be red for some reason. And that's going to change every heading 2 throughout the entire document. So that's just basic, using styles is to your benefit. Using heading styles specifically makes the document accessible and gives it structure. Any questions about that?
Formatted text, then
Yeah.
just heading.
So the question is, if you want to go through and change all of what would seem to be heading 2s, you want to change them all to heading 2, but they're currently something else, but they all have some characteristic that makes them the same, then you should be able to search and replace or do something like that, so that you can kind of automate that process instead of going through one by one. And I believe there probably is a way, but I don't know what it is. Anybody else, any word autos that know how to do something like that? Yeah. So David says he confirms there is indeed a way. And so if that's something, if you got a long document you want to work with, then yeah, we can explore that together. Any other questions? Okay, let's look at this graphic at the top of the page that says Accessible University. It is just an image, so there's actually no text there. It means we have to provide the alternate text.
Highlights one of the texts that's similarly formatted under the Home tab, under the editing button grouping, select button, and then the third choice down, select text with similar.
Okay. So going back to that previous question then, if you select the text that you are wanting to work with, and then click on the Home tab on the ribbon, and all the way over in the far right, the editing grouping, there's a select item, and within that there's an option to select text with similar formatting. So then you could select all the text, and then you can tag it as a heading 2. Excellent. Thanks, David. Okay, so the image, we want to add alternate text to this, and I think it's pretty safe to say every authoring tool that supports images supports alternate text. I don't know of any that don't. Google Docs actually was the last holdout. For many years I was saying almost all, and with Google Docs you could add an image, but you couldn't add a description to it. But they've corrected that, and so now I think pretty much any time you can add an image, there is some option. You're prompted at that moment when you add the image, or later you can go back and add a description to that image. So the question is then, how do you describe an image? And the goal is to make sure that whatever is being communicated here is communicated to somebody that can't see the image. And so to do this, we right-click, and we select Format Picture. And it's a little bit different different versions of Word, but the way it works in this particular version, you just, in any version, you look within whatever popped up, the Format Picture dialog, and you poke around a little bit until you find the alt text option. And so in this case, it's under Layout and Properties, and there's an option there for alt text. So if we expand that, we actually have two fields, a title and a description, where we can enter our alt text. And this is a little bit of a stumbling point. There, in some versions, earlier versions of Word, and in some other authoring tools, there's only one field for alt text, not two. So this is a new feature as of Word 2010. I think they added two-field approach. So now you have two fields. The problem with that is they added it, but there isn't good backward compatibility or cross-compatibility with other tools. And so if you enter a short description in the title field and a longer description in the description field, some of that's going to get lost. Export, or if you open it in an older version of Word. And so my recommendation after doing a lot of testing back and forth with a bunch of different formats is to just use description. That is the only one of these two fields that almost always survives when you open it up in a different tool or when you export. So and actually at TerrillThompson.com, I wrote a blog post about this a few months ago that shows you some of my test results. So kind of that rule might be broken if you know that you're saving to a particular format or that people in your audience are going to be opening it using a particular tool. You might want to use the title field, but more often than not, the description field is the best one to use. So then the question is, what do you type in there? How do you describe this image? How would you describe this image? What's the important message that you want people who can't see the image to get? Okay, logo for what university? Okay, so the fact that we see Accessible University there as text is really important, that if there's text, we want that text to be part of the alt text. Okay, so we definitely want to say Accessible University. So that's what we would type into the description field. And we might also want to say that this is the logo. That's kind of, with any alt text, there's always sort of a decision to be made. Is this important? And whether this is a logo or not, or whether people just need to be reminded that they are at Accessible University, in this context on the Introduction to Physics syllabus, it may or may not be important. And it's really only one additional word, so not a big deal if we decide to add it. If this was a page about the Accessible University logo and how it came to be and all the different designs that sort of went into the final design and the history and evolution of the logo, then probably we would want to have more of a description there, because there's kind of some iconography in the background that is perhaps relevant in that context. So it really depends on what the context is. And that's so anytime you're adding alt text, you just need to ask, here in this context, what is the message that I'm trying to communicate? And then communicate that succinctly. So we don't want to burden users with a lot of information. We just want to provide what's relevant so they get access to the information and then they can move on, just like a sighted user does. Make sense? Okay, any questions? Yes? Then it would just be in parentheses as alt text, and that might create a little bit of extra noise for a screen reader user, depending on how they're configured. It might say, left parent, logo, right parent, as it read that aloud. So, but it's just going to be part of the alt text. Other questions? Okay. Let's look at language, since there were a few people that said language is important. That last sentence there is in French, and notice that most of the words in that are underlined red because it thinks they're misspelled. It's because it thinks that this is English. And so the technique for identifying it in French actually has to do with the spelling. This is one of those hacks that screen readers have figured out sort of how to figure out whether it is by looking at the spelling settings, the language settings. So to change it, go to Review, and in the language grouping, there is a language button. And if we click on that, we can set the proofing language. By default, it probably is English, and so we scroll down to French, and then we decide this is Belgium, Caribbean, or France French. Select France French. And now it's no longer underlined in red, so it is identified as a French paragraph, which means that a screen reader user would be able to read this appropriately, and it would pronounce that sentence appropriately. Any questions about language? Okay. The heading at the top of the second table under class schedule, or that first row there, contains headings, and so we need to communicate to screen readers that these are headings. And the way you do that, select that row, then right-click, select Table Properties, click on the Row tab, and there's an option there to repeat as header row at the top of each page. So what you're essentially saying is that this is the header row of this table, and the way it's expressed there for that checkbox, it doesn't really have anything to do with accessibility. It has to do with if you've got a long table and it prints over multiple pages, then you want to repeat that header row at the top of each page, so a person, doesn't have to keep referring back to the first page table. So that again is another one of those hacks where screen readers have figured out, okay, it's identifying this as the header row for printing purposes, but we can use that information and communicate that to our users in a way that works for them. So we want to have that checkbox checked. The second table is more complex because we have nested rows, or nested rows or nested columns with headers in them, multiple rows of headers, and it's a more complex table. And this is one of those areas where Word falls short. There actually is no way to mark this up in Word in a way that is compatible with what you can do in HTML. With HTML, there are tags that allow you to clearly communicate the structure of this table so the screen reader users can understand it. PDF has that same markup support that HTML has. You can't get there from here. You can't mark up a Word table so that those relationships are explicit. So this is one of those areas where if you have a complex table like this and trying to present that to people, Word might not be your best choice for a document type. Putting this in a web page would be better, at least putting that table in a web page, and then maybe linking off to it, something like that. Or really look at the data and ask yourself, could this be presented in a way that is simpler? So we don't have nested rows and nested columns. We've got maybe two tables where there used to be one, but it's simpler perhaps for everybody to understand. And coding would be simpler for making sure that screen reader users understand it. Okay, so we've added all this accessible markup. We now have a pretty accessible Word doc. Falls a little bit short on that one table, but otherwise we've got all the stuff that we need to have an accessible document. And if we distribute this, as long as the person has Microsoft Word or some means of reading the Word doc, then they could read this. They could benefit from its accessibility features. If, however, we're wanting to distribute it as a PDF, then we need to be careful how we save it. Word, as I mentioned, by default, if you go to File, Save as Adobe PDF in this version, in earlier versions you had to walk through a few more steps, but it was the same idea, Save as PDF. That by default will create a tagged PDF that preserves all of the stuff you've done, the headings, the lists, the table header, the alt text, language. It preserves all that and sends it to the PDF, and the PDF then is tagged and accessible. So that's what we want to do. Save as Adobe PDF. And you'll be prompted to save the file first, so you need to save it. And you probably need to give it a different name. And you might be prompted to sign in to Creative Cloud and just exit that, I think. And when you're finished, it should open up your document in something. Hopefully, for me, it opened it up in Adobe Acrobat Pro DC. Is that true for all of you as well? We want it to be in Acrobat Pro, not in Adobe Reader, because Adobe Reader doesn't have all the features that we want to look at. Okay, so with this open, I want to turn your attention back to the web again. So if you just open up your web browser, let's go to that resource that's on the UW site, uw.edu/accessibility/PDF. Oh, why is that happening, Max? Okay, not /PDF/documents. There you go.
Yeah, I don't know. Somehow it's still.
So this is talks a lot about. This is a set of pages that talks a lot about the things that we have talked about, the need for structure and making sure that this is all part of your documents. But then we link to some more specific tutorials, step by step, on various things, creating accessible documents in Microsoft Word, as we've just discussed, creating accessible PDFs from Word, creating accessible PDFs from Adobe InDesign. So those of you that raised your hand and said, I'm using InDesign, there's a little bit of information there. We actually plan to populate that with more up-to-date information and more thorough information, but it also links off to some other resources, so that can be a good starting point. Fixing inaccessible PDFs using Adobe Acrobat Pro, and creating accessible PDF forms using Acrobat Pro. So let's focus on the fourth one, fixing inaccessible PDFs using Adobe Acrobat Pro. Let's open that up. This is a 6-step process. So what we want to do is just walk through these 6 steps. First of all, does the document have text? It tells you how to test that, and it tells you what to do if it doesn't. So we know that this document has text because we created it in Word. But if we want to make sure, we just go back over to Acrobat Pro and we just try selecting some text. And if we can select text, then there's text there. You could also do Control A, which is select all. That will select all the text if there is text there. If you've just got an image, you're not going to be able to do either of those things. Plus you might see like some little pieces of dust and things on your document, which is also a good indication that it's not really text. If it was not text, then we would have to run OCR on it. We'd have to actually recognize text and convert it into text. And our document says you do that with View, Tools, Recognize Text. And this is my very first time using Acrobat Pro DC, so it looks a little different. But within our tools, we should be able to search for something like Recognize, or maybe not. I don't know where it is within DC now. Anybody else know whether Adobe Acrobat Pro still has, surely it still has OCR capabilities. Oh, there it is. So if you type in Recognize within your tool search, there is an option there to recognize text. So it would do its best job, and like with any scan, it depends on the quality of the scan. So if you've been scanning a book and you've got kind of some curved text in the margin or those sorts of flaws, then it's going to be less accurate with that. And so it'll prompt you with the things that it doesn't have a high confidence level on, and you can go in and you can type in the correct text if it messed up with some stuff. So in our case, it is text, so we're good there. So those 3 types of PDF were at least better than the first type. It's not just an image. So step 2, is the document tagged? To tell this, go to File Properties, and we can actually do this within Acrobat Reader as well. We can do either of these steps within Reader or within Acrobat. But we want to go to Document Properties, which is either Control-D or Command-D, or you can get there from the File menu. And within the Document Properties dialog, at the lower left corner, there is a tagged PDF, either yes or no. Most of our documents, unfortunately, are going to say no, you'll find, if you start routinely doing this. Whenever you open up a PDF, just look at its properties and see if it's tagged or not. Most are going to be not tagged. This one is tagged because it was created in Word, and Word automatically creates a tagged PDF.
Word in Windows.
Word in Windows. That's a good point, actually, going back a step. What we did when we saved as PDF, and that automatically created a tagged PDF, there's no way to do that in the Mac. How many of you are Word for Mac users? Okay, not too many hands go up, so that's good. But those of you that did raise your hand, if you do File Save as PDF, you can save as PDF from Word for Mac, but it does not create a tagged PDF. It only does that in Windows. So there are a couple workarounds. One is just to find a Windows machine. And that's that final step. Open your Word for Mac document in Word for Windows and then export it from there. If you don't have access to a Windows machine, another workaround is OpenOffice or LibreOffice. LibreOffice is actually a little bit better, I think. But it's free. It's all that on your Mac, and it does save as tagged PDF. Or you can just do all of your authoring in LibreOffice and give up on Microsoft. I don't know whether that's realistic, but So anyway, in this case, we're good. We've got tag PDF, so we have passed the first 2 checks. Just because it's a tagged PDF, though, doesn't make it accessible. That gives it the foundation for accessibility. Now we need to make sure the tags are correct. So let's go back over to our web page and see what it says under step 3. Step 3, does the document need to be touched up? And then back over into Acrobat Pro. Acrobat Pro has a set of tools related to accessibility. They probably aren't visible by default. But again, if you search tools over in your tool sidebar there on the right side, search for accessibility, and they should pop up. And you can see what they all are. There's an accessibility report. You can auto tag the document. You can set the alternate text on images. There are some reading options. There's a full check. There's a setup assistant. And there are a couple items related to form tagging. So prior to DC, there was an option called touch-up reading order, which now must go by a different name. Reading options? See reading order somewhere? Under accessibility? There it is. Yeah, okay. And if you hover over it, it says touch-up reading order to remind those of us from older versions that this is in fact what you're looking for. Okay, so when you select that, and it shows you the read order of this document. It identifies all the different pieces and places a number for each one, and that's the order in which it might be read. See anything here that looks like it's kind of out of order?
Paragraphs. I don't know if you need heading 4 on that. Would it just be like a paragraph?
Actually, those numbers aren't heading levels or anything. It's just the order. If you're just reading the page, when you're just reading the page, then that's the order. Okay, yeah, the logo, that would seem like it should be first, right? It's at the very top of the page, but it falls in last for some reason. Somebody said, what's number 1? 1 is like this little invisible thing. I'm not sure what that is. But so you can tweak this by just clicking on any item that is in question. First of all, let's start with that number 1, the little visible number 1 thing. And then what do we want to do with that? Within our touch-up reading order dialog, there are all these things we can declare this to be. Since there really is no content there in number 1, we can just declare this to be part of the background. And we click on the background button, and number 1 then disappears. So that actually is a good thing to do with anything that's going to be distracting in a PDF. So a lot of just sort of visual images that really don't get any sort of information. Then clicking on those, making them part of the background, just get them out of the way, a nice clean document, and then you can just work with the content of the document. I would argue the same about headers and footers. That that's the same information that's repeated throughout the document and usually sort of interrupts the flow of reading. And from my perspective, that's not that important, and it's better off just gone. But maybe preserve that, like at the top of the first page or at the bottom of the last page, so it's there in some form, not on every single page, because it just is going to be redundant and has some value, but has the cons outweigh the pros, I think. So I would make that part of the background too. Now we're still stuck with number 12, the figure at the top, which should be number 1. If we actually want to change the order, then in the touch-up reading order dialog, there's a button to show order panel. So we're going from one dialog to another, in a sense. We want to show the order panel, and that lists all of the items on this page in order. And number 12 is that image. We want that to be number 1, so we actually just click it and then drag it up to the top. Now, that no longer number 12, it's number 1. The art of dragging that is a little bit tricky, so if you end up with it in the wrong place, don't be discouraged. It happens to everybody. Just keep trying until you get it in the right place. Also, notice that that figure has the alt text associated with it. So it says Accessible University logo or whatever we typed in as alt text. So this is also an interface where we can find the alt text of our images. If it didn't have any alt text, it would say figure without alt text. It actually would say that. And in that case, you right-click on it, and there's an option to edit alternate text. So if it didn't have any, we could type that in now, or if we decided we wanted to change it, we could type that in as well. Or say don't add alt text if this is just a visual image, just for aesthetic purposes, not for informative purposes, and that would then make it background. Sometimes, particularly InDesign documents, are particularly problematic, depending on how they're created. But you get content all over the place, just a jumbled mess of numbers, layers that really probably should just be part of the background. And this step becomes particularly critical when you're trying to go back in and fix an InDesign or document, a PDF that was created in InDesign. Any questions about step 3?
Take something part of the background but needed to put it back in. How do you do that?
That would be in step 4. Step 4 is probably the hardest of the 4 steps, particularly for those of you that did not raise your hand when I asked about web design experience, because step 4 is a very web design-y kind of thing. Step 4 is, are headings marked up as headings at appropriate levels? Now combine that with step 5, does other markup need to be fixed? So what we actually want to do is we want to look at the tags that are forming the structure of this document and make sure that those tags are correct. So, so it helps to be a little bit comfortable with tags. But even if you aren't, you can get pretty comfortable with tags. Close the things that are kind of in the way now, the touch-up reading order and the order panel. And I'll even close tool. I don't know if I can make that go all the way away, can I? Oh, there we go, the little arrow here. So now I just have a nice clean document. Over on the left side, there are a set of additional panes or panels that you can pop up. The one that we want is this one that I have that looks like a luggage tag. This is where we can view the tag structure. And you might not have that. Does anybody have that? You do? Does anybody not have that? Most people do not. If you right-click in that left margin over there. Then you can select from all these other things, and the one you want is the one that says tags. Then once you have a little luggage tag icon, you can click that, and that opens up a panel that has the tag structure in it. So we can then study the tag tree. And it's got a little plus sign, so you can expand that. You can expand it again. And then we start getting into some real markup. So the big question that number 4 is asking, again, headings are really a critical thing. So the most important question that you can ask, you're going in to fix your PDF, and it is tagged, but you want to see if the tags are good. You want to see if the headings, that's the first thing you should look for, is are the headings marked up as headings at reasonably appropriate levels? And so we'll select that first heading, and over in the tag panel, there's this little menu, little icon button up at the top. I don't know what to call it. I guess an options menu above the tag panel. And if you select that, there are lots of options in here. Very helpful. One of those is find tag from selection. So after you've selected some text and you want to see what the tag is that's associated with that text, click Find Tag from Selection, and it will then highlight that particular tag in the tag tree. So then you can see, okay, that is a heading 1. That's good. That's what I wanted. And we can do the same thing with the heading 2. We select the heading 2. You bet. Go to Find Tag from Selection. That is a heading 2, so that's good. So that's our main objective, is just going through and checking the heading structure. Make sure headings are good. Make sure they're tagged appropriately. But we can also look at other things like, we've got a list. We want to make sure that's a list. And it is. There's an L tag, and there are 3 LIs. Another way to explore the tag structure is just to click a tag, and that is highlighted within the document. See what part of the document is associated with that tag. If something was not tagged correctly, like let's say, textbook in another world, maybe this was an H3, not an H2, and we can right-click on it, go to Properties, and there's a drop-down where we can select a whole bunch of other things to label this as rather than heading 2. So we select heading 3, close it, and it changes that to an H3. So it's a little bit inconsistent in that you've got a heading 1 spelled out. Now heading 3, which we've selected within Adobe, is just abbreviated. Generally, the abbreviations seem to work best, are best supported by assistive technologies. And so if you are an HTML person, or if you just get comfortable with tags, and you don't have to go into the Properties dialog, you can actually just click on any tag and then type in what you know that tag should be. It's much quicker once you get to know the tags to just click and then type, H1, H2, whatever. Tag things that way. Is that overwhelming to you non-taggers? Do you look at that and think, there's no way I'm ever going to do that? What do you think? Does it seem pretty straightforward? Which is it? Straightforward? That's about half the room. A little overwhelming, perhaps. And not too many overwhelmed hands. That's good. All right, step 5 is the final step, or no, it's not. Step 6 is the final step. That is check for any lingering errors. As you may have noticed when we looked at just the accessibility tools that are available to us, one of those is an accessibility checker. So that is very useful, and actually, as of Acrobat 11, it started becoming pretty easy to use. In the past, I not recommended that people use it at all necessarily, because it gives you with a lot of information that is kind of overwhelming and not clear, and people just get confused by it. But at the very least, I always recommend it as the last step. So do the things that you know are going to be issues, which would be these first 5 things, and then do the accessibility check, and it'll just identify the things that you haven't addressed yet. And so that's the final step then, is we bring up our tools, bring up our accessibility tools, and then run a full check. It'll prompt us with, what do you want to check? And everything is checked by default, and so we might as well just keep it that way. And then we click Start Checking. And then it comes up with the results in a panel over on the left, and we just expand each one of these and see what the results are. So under Documents, you've got a bunch of things that have green check marks. That's good. Those are successful. Those are done. You've got a couple of things that are blue, which require manual inspection. You've got at least one thing that failed. So anybody not there? Okay. How far?
In the middle of the column. Oh, okay.
Just click Start Checking. Okay, and then there's your results, and if you click on that, you'll be right where I am. So each one of these items has help associated with it, so it still, in my opinion, is questionable how helpful some of the help text is. But if you're really not sure, like title failed, right-click, click on Explain, and it would open up a page on the Adobe website that's an explanation. So you could do that, or there's just a fix option, so maybe you just fix it, the problem will go away, and it did. That it may not have gone away in a way that's favorable. The issue with the title, and I think the fact that you can fix it so easily is probably not a good thing. That the title, see it in our title bar here in Adobe Acrobat. What is the title of this document? Yeah, syllabus underscore not accessible to.pdf. So that's what the screen reader is going to read with the title of the document, which isn't particularly clear. It's not a huge issue because they probably know what document they're looking at. But just if they're multitasking, it's helpful to have that reminder. And so you actually it'd be better to have a better title than that. Go into File, Properties. And it actually does have a better title than that. Maybe we'd have to save our changes and open the document again, and we would get a different title in the title bar. Anyway, so the idea here is we just step through all of the prompts and try to get as close to accessible as we can get. The question, though, is how much time do you want to spend on this when you've got, if you have hundreds of documents you're trying to make accessible, then you really need to prioritize. And, I'm an accessibility advocate, so I'd love for every document to be accessible, but we have hundreds, thousands of documents that need to be made accessible. So I think it's better to have all of those with good headings and tags than to have 10 of those that are perfectly accessible with every tiny little detail made accessible. So that really is up to you, looking at the PDFs that you have to work with and, how much time you have to devote to them, how you want to prioritize that. But, I think it's safe to at least make as many documents as possible, reasonably accessible so somebody can navigate them and can generally understand them. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. You've learned all the basics of PDF accessibility. Does it feel like something you could go back and try to apply to PDFs in your world? Okay, see a lot of people nodding. That's excellent. Why don't we try one together? There were a couple. Max sent out an email asking folks for PDFs, and a couple of you did send PDFs. You sent really hard PDFs. So I'm happy to talk with you about those, individually, but I think they're above and beyond what we want to explore here. They raise some really interesting challenges. But if we go, this is actually go to Google and type site:/wwu.edu type:/PDF, and that will give you all just PDFs at Western. And it says there are about 4,350 results. And so that's how many documents we have, according to Google, need to be made accessible. And that doesn't count all the ones that are being distributed through Canvas or elsewhere that are behind wraps. I looked through some of these top PDFs, which are very popular resources. Like this very first one is cited by 1,064 other sites, and so that's one that really should be accessible. And this would be one way to kind of approach this, would be just going through a list like this and saying, okay, that's a really popular resource. We need to make that accessible. Some of these are really hard, though. One that's showing up second for me, selective and differential media. Do y'all have that in your results somewhere? Why don't we take a look at that one? And we'll just kind of walk through this whole process using this actual real-world document. So if you're in Chrome, it can be a challenge to save the PDF to your desktop. I think you want to click on it to open it up in Chrome, and then click on the little disk that allows you to save it, and then save it to your desktop or to some location where you can find it easily. It was site:/wwu.edu and type:/PDF.
Space type.
Yep. And then selective and differential media is the one that we were going to work with. So you click the little disk, save it somewhere where you can access it. And then we want to open this up. This is another tricky thing, that if you just click on it now, it's just going to open it back in Chrome again, I think. So you need to open with the system, with show in folder, and then right-click it and select Edit with Adobe Acrobat. And that should then open it in Adobe Acrobat. Anybody get lost with those steps? Okay, everybody got that document open? Looking good? All right. So let's just walk through the steps then, one by one. you still have that document open, or if you remember what the steps are. First of all, does the document have text? Go ahead and shout out your answer. Yes, it's an enthusiastic shout. Okay, so far so good. Is it tagged? No. Okay. So if we go into document properties, it tells us tag PDF, no. Okay. So the first thing we're going to need to do, actually the first thing is probably just to kind of look at the document and see what we're in for here. The reason I selected it is it's pretty straightforward. It's got just text in a single column. It has multiple headings, and so we definitely want those headings to be accessible. It has some lists, numbered lists, and it has one image. So that seems pretty straightforward. So to tag a document that is not currently tagged, it tells us how to do that in that workflow site at the UW. But it's a tool within our accessibility toolkit. It is auto tag document. So we click that. It looks at the document, tries to figure out what the tag structure is, and then it tags it. And I'm actually really excited to try this in DC for the first time because the science of tagging a document has not gotten much better since Acrobat 5, but we'll see. Once the document is tagged, it puts up a report telling you, giving you some confidence levels and things that it found as it was tagging the document. I usually just dismiss that. It's just extra information. The next step, rather than reading through that, if you're comfortable with the tag tree, is just to look at the tags it came up with. So to open up your tags and explore a little bit, see if the tags it came up with are the ones that you would have selected, or if you think there's something that needs to be tweaked. So what do you think when you look at these tags? Is there anything that jumps out at you as requiring some tweaking?
It considers pretty much all the headers. H3 one is probably the title of the paper.
Okay. So if we go in with a sort of an idea of what the outline is, I would have said, obviously we need an H1, so the title of the document, selective and differential media, that should be an H1, and all the others should probably be H2s, and we want to look at that really closely because there might be some H3s that are in there, And that might be hard to do unless you know the material, but usually there's some visible, differentiation between the thing styles. But definitely we want this first one to be a heading 1, and it seems to be a heading 3. So we select that, we go to Find Tag from Selection, and there it is that H3. So if we want to change it, all we have to do is click on the H3 a couple times until it becomes editable, and we change 3 to 1, and now we have an H1. Same thing with the other headings. Again, making headings the priority, and then once we're satisfied that the headings are all levels that we want them to be, turn our attention to things like lists. And the list actually is coded as a list, so that's good. Are you looking under first period materials?
Going down to second period.
Under procedure? Oh, I see.
Oh yeah, that one. That one.
Okay, so it's just one item in a list.
Right.
So maybe that's a glimpse into Acrobat's intelligence, that if there's only one item, it doesn't perceive it to be a list. And it kind of has a valid argument there, maybe. But, so we could make that an LI. And what you're seeing inside these other LIs, labels and LBody and all that, it's good semantics, but it's not supported by screen readers. So it's just going to read a list item as a list item. So I wouldn't worry about having label and LBody tags inside my
Item itself.
yeah.
Or it's not.
Yeah,
Okay.
and you could. It's a little messy. I mean, there's more work that you could do. You could create a new element, which would be a list item. Convert that into a list. Convert that into a list item. Create a ordered list, and add them into the ordered list. No. Yeah, a lot of times you get the tags, particularly in InDesign documents, the tags are going to reflect the InDesign styles. They're going to be named according to your InDesign styles. And so you're going to get some weird names for tags. But it really doesn't matter. Screen readers look for certain things, and that's a pretty limited set. Looks for headings, looks for lists, looks for table markup. Anything else is just going to be read as text, just like paragraphs. So whether it's section tags or article tags or something completely abstract, it's just going to be plain text. So it doesn't really matter. Yep.
Is there any way to preview like a section? You have to have the actual e-reader software in order to get it to.
Yeah, unfortunately, the only way to test it for screen readers, which is mostly what we've been talking about, really is to have a screen reader and to try that out. It does have, Adobe Acrobat Pro does have a feature called Read Out Loud, which is under View, Read Out Loud. You can then activate Read Out Loud. And you can, and I'll just do this. I don't know what it would be like if everybody did this at once in a lab, but then read this page only or read
First
to the
period
end of the document.
microbursts of the body, gram-positive coxite, the bodies of mammals, mollusks, insects and other representatives of the animal kingdom are natural habitats for microorganisms. Many microorganisms exist in balanced symbiosis with host organisms.
And so that'll just give you a glimpse at, it's not a screen reader in a regular sense that people can't jump around from heading to heading and do all the stuff that they usually do with a screen reader. But at least you can tell whether it's readable or not. So there are some issues with like your font selection. If you use a non-standard font, screen readers don't understand at all, can't read it at all, and you wouldn't know that unless you actually tried listening to it. So that actually is a good practice too, just to read at least a little bit to see what you got. But in terms of checking your tag structure after you've done some of this manipulation, you really need to have a screen reader. There is a free one. JAWS actually is pretty expensive, but there's one for Windows called NVDA, stands for Non-Visual Desktop Access. That's open source, free, and works pretty well. And is now capable of PDFs, and so that would be something to look into. So you've got that in your arsenal of tools. Any other questions? Yes.
Looks like it has broken up. Looks like it's broken it up into two separate headings.
Positive
Okay.
talk site.
So I'm going to turn off read out loud. So select that, go to find tag from selection. Yeah, it's kind of a weird that's a tag in and of itself, but it's all grouped together within the same element. So the only issue is it's a paragraph, and so that should be changed to a heading, which looks like it's the same level heading as other headings like it. So either H2 or H3, depending on.
You can drag it, drag the positive inside of the heading tag.
It's a,
hyphen span is just empty.
yeah. So, but again, the hyphen span doesn't affect anything, so it's just extra noise. So, yep.
Is there a tool a free or low-cost tool that you're aware of that would just quickly check for the existence of tags in the format without having to go into each one and test?
That's a good question. So, is there a free or low-cost tool that will do just some automated basic assessment of PDFs? There are some free tools that I keep hearing about that I haven't had a chance to check yet. There are several tools that are not at all inexpensive, extremely expensive, that will audit PDFs for accessibility, but also provide some functionality for better editing of accessibility within PDFs. So to answer your question, I haven't found a tool like that, but we're constantly on the lookout for such things because there definitely is a need. It'd be great to be able to just crawl, through all of those PDFs that Google's able to find, and you come up with an inventory of which ones are tagged, which ones aren't, and sort of focus our energies, using that kind of information. So, but I'll keep you posted through the task force and let you know what we come up with. Any other questions? We still have 10 minutes left, and we can just call that, it's not much time, but it's just informal time. If you wanted to look at your own PDFs, then I can roam around and answer any questions that you have at that point. But appreciate you all coming and spending 2 hours on a lovely summer morning. Thanks. You've got, my email was on the opening slide, so terrill.thompson@ww.edu. So feel free to contact me, as you're getting into this, working with PDFs. If you have questions, then I'm happy to help you out with those.